There are lots of stunningly beautiful states and places in the United States, and certainly included among the top tier is the captivatingly, majestically beautiful state of Wyoming. Wyoming is a Rocky Mountain state. There are some rolling plains in the northeast, but the Rocky Mountains are the dominant geographical feature. Wyoming is almost square in shape. It's 356 miles east to west and 278 miles north to south at the widest points. It is nearly square, as I say. Now, Wyoming is a very sparsely populated state. There are vast areas of land in the state of Wyoming that could legitimately be called the middle of nowhere because they are very far from any population centers. And in that respect, it's a little scary to think about having certain kinds of problems that far away from population centers, whether it be a medical issue, whether it be crime, whether it be a traffic accident, whether it be dangerous wildlife. But the threats from dangerous wildlife and crime certainly do make it a good thing that Wyoming is sort of an open carry state. It really is a good thing because in those far out areas you might very well need firearms to defend yourself against either bad people or dangerous wildlife. So being that far from virtually everything except wilderness can in fact be a little scary. The chief rivers in Wyoming are the North Platte, the Bighorn, the Powder River, and the Green River. The principal cities are the capital of Cheyenne, which is actually in the southeastern corner of the state. It is one of the least centrally located state capitals anywhere in the United States. It's in the southeast corner, and that metro area contains about 98,000 people. The Casper metro area, which is a little bit further to the north and to the west, contains about 75,000 people. There are less than 600,000 people in the entire state of Wyoming. So there are cities that have a bigger population than Wyoming does. Now, Wyoming is the location for some very beautiful and dramatic scenic wonders. In the northwest, you have Yellowstone National Park and also Grand Teton National Park. Some other areas of interest are the Independence Pueblo, Fossil Butte, and Devil's Tower, which is a very famous landmark in the northwestern part of the state, the northwestern corner, in sort of the plateau area. And it's this very high, sort of flat-topped, except it's not really flat if you get up there. It's this huge upcropping of rock, and it was made very famous in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind because that was the place that aliens and people from Earth were going to meet for the first time, and it's a very remote location, very beautiful location. Devil's Tower National Monument, which is actually the first national monument in the United States, designated so in 1906. So lots of parks and recreation areas and monuments in beautiful Wyoming. The state of Wyoming is mostly rural. 91% of the land area is rural. 50% is owned by the federal government. Now, Wyoming has some very interesting wildlife and some of the most diverse wildlife that you have anywhere in the United States. There are some very large mammals in Wyoming. Those include pronghorn antelope, whitetail and mule deer, elk, moose, bighorn sheep, black bears, grizzly bears, the dangerous ones. Grizzly bear is the most dangerous bear. Then you also have mountain lions, which we have in New Mexico, and coyotes, which we also have. There are bobcats, beaver, and prairie dogs. As far as the climate goes, Wyoming has long, cold winters and short, hot summers. Both of these are mitigated by the fact that you have low humidity in Wyoming. So the cold doesn't feel quite as cold, and the hot doesn't feel quite as hot. Spring and fall tend to be transitional periods, short transitional periods between the summer and winter. I would say that on the whole, the best time of the year in Wyoming is the summer, which tends to be much more moderate than you have in other parts of the country. Some of the trees that you have in Wyoming are the cottonwood, the Douglas and white fir, birch, quaking aspen, willows, ponderosa pines. So those are some of the trees. What about the culture of Wyoming? Well, it's very much cowboy culture, the Old West. You do have some football and basketball, but those are not nearly as popular as rodeo. I would have to say that as far as big spectator sports go, rodeo is the most popular. And Cheyenne has a very famous rodeo each year called Cheyenne Frontier Days, and that is perhaps the most interesting sporting event in the state. Wyoming is too small in population to have a professional sports team. And other areas of culture, there are two symphony orchestras, and I think if you're going to talk culture, you certainly need to have some classical music and some orchestras. There is the Wyoming Symphony in Cheyenne and the Casper Symphony, obviously, in Casper. At last count, I counted about 15 television stations and also movie theaters. I didn't get that number exactly, but they are scattered in various parts of the state. So certainly they do have television and internet and movies in Wyoming. As far as health goes, I mentioned the population of Wyoming is very sparse, and so health care and much of the state is not what you would have other places, but there are two level 2 trauma centers, which is next to the highest level of care. There is the Cheyenne Regional Medical Center in the capital Cheyenne, and the Wyoming Regional Medical Center in Casper. And those are both level 2 trauma centers, and they have the capability to transport people to level 1 trauma centers in Denver, Salt Lake City, and some other out-of-state locations. Although I will say that far out in the wilderness, it could be a real problem to have a heart issue or something kind of like that. Industries. The leading industries of Wyoming are mineral extraction, mining, which includes oil and gas production, tourism, obviously because of the captivating beauty of Wyoming, and agriculture. So what kind of agriculture do they have? Wyoming produces beef, sheep, hay, sugar beets, and grain. And there are some others too, but those are just the most prominent. Cuisine. Wyoming cuisine. With Wyoming cuisine, you have a lot of wild game, local game, and that includes elk, for example. The traditional Western cookout that you have in Wyoming is not exactly 5-star cuisine, but it basically consists of salty meats, baked beans, and biscuits. Not too bad, really. That can make a decent weeknight meal, in my opinion. Although, when it comes to salty meats, I don't normally add salt anymore because I have hypertension. So, I could have that for a dinner, but I wouldn't be adding salt to it. The meats would be somewhat salty anyway. In terms of education, they do have one state university, the University of Wyoming, which I believe is at Laramie, and also there is the Wyoming Catholic College in Laramie. In terms of religion, Wyoming is 49% Protestant, 18% Catholic, and the rest other. There are a lot of people who consider themselves nothing in particular, and that would be about a quarter of the population. The largest minority, there are no really large minorities in Wyoming. The minority population is very small, and all the minorities are very small, but the most prominent one are American Indians, specifically the Shoshone and Arapaho nations, who live on the Wind River Indian Reservation. Of course, the capital, Cheyenne, is located in Laramie County. Casper is located in Natrona County. Interestingly enough, the town of Laramie is not located in Laramie County, but it's located to the west of there in Albany County. But that was some information about the key areas. Now, lately, I've seen some negative stuff about, oh, I should mention also that Wyoming is a great place for UFO sightings. There are a lot of UFO sightings in Wyoming. It's wide open spaces. So I've seen lately some negative stuff posted about Wyoming on social media. Maybe it has to do with the fact that Wyoming is 91% white. Well, you know what? There is nothing wrong with that. There are a lot of white folks, myself included, who don't believe that white folks are the source of all racial tension and the source of all racial evil, and would very much like to live their lives, just go about their business free from all that. In no county in Wyoming do Democrats outnumber Republicans as far as political party registration. And the thing that you have to understand, the kind of lifestyle that they live there is not consistent with voting for people like Kamala Harris or Hillary Clinton or Cory Booker, because when you get into things like abortion, marijuana legalization, minority favoritism, those things simply don't go over very well with the people of Wyoming. It's a cowboy culture. They are fiercely independent people. Now, the Wyoming legislature tried to do something that I think is very bad a while back. The Senate tried to pass a bill imposing work requirements on all Medicaid recipients. That bill died in the House. I'm not a Republican by any means. In fact, I'm more independent, but I can understand why those people shy away from the Democratic Party. You know, the minority favoritism, they may be being perceived as too weak on defense, the abortion thing, and it's amazing how people cry out against social injustice, and yet abortion is considered just. That is kind of a strange thing. The Republican Party does an awful lot of bad things, but the abortion thing that the Democratic Party does is very evil as well. And minority favoritism, they don't much like that. They don't like marijuana legalization. The Wyoming State Police have warned people in Colorado that they will get into serious trouble. And they're just not, receptive to those sort of things. So a candidate like Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Julian Castro, or whatever his name is, O'Rourke, those people really wouldn't have much of a chance in Wyoming. And when you look at agriculture, it's not the type of agriculture that depends a lot on immigrant labor. It's local state labor, and they are fiercely independent people. And I can understand why, in many ways, a lot of stands in the Democratic Party kind of go against the culture. So I can understand that, even though I'm not a Republican. But Wyoming is a great place to go if you want to be left the hell alone. As I said, the population of that entire state is below 700,000, so the entire state is less than some cities. Nevertheless, they do have culture. They have level 1 trauma centers in 2 cities. They have symphony orchestras in 2 cities. They have movie theaters scattered all over the state. They have their own sport, which is the favorite, which is rodeo, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's part of the culture. But it really is one of the most beautiful places in the United States. I actually would tend to shy away from some of the more remote areas, because if you do run into any kind of significant problem, you're far away from any kind of help, any professional fire protection or anything of that nature. So in a lot of ways, Wyoming is more remote than many areas of the desert Southwest, but it's still a beautiful place with Grand Teton, Yellowstone. Also, hunting is a way of life in Wyoming. People do hunt big game, and they use the big game for food. That's just part of the culture. It always has been, and when other politicians are seen to be against that, it's a bit of a problem, because hunting is part of the culture. But Wyoming has a lot to offer. It is a captivatingly beautiful place. It is in many ways a peaceful and harmonious place. It's a place that you could go to get away from it all. So, regardless of what some people might say, I think Wyoming is a wonderful place. You really ought to see it sometimes. Have a very good day.